Okay, we are live, and welcome to the Loud and Holistic Health Partners Mental Health Q&A series. This is number 2 in our series of 5. I think I actually... Wow, sorry, did everybody hear that? I all of a sudden started getting a bunch of feedback.
I didn't hear anything.
Okay, so this is number 2 out of a planned 5 mental health topics that we're going to cover. This one is about depression. And I am excited and honored to be joined by my lovely partner and wife, Dr. Ann Stewart. So if anyone's here, this isn't like Zoom where we can see people's faces. If anyone's here, can you send us a chat? Because we have no idea if anyone is watching or listening or anything right now.
Might just be the two of us.
That'd be cool. Actually, yeah, let me change. Oh, I see Danielle chimed in.
Great.
Hi, Danielle. Oh, there's Jillian. Hi, Jillian. Now, a couple housekeeping things. Elaine is in the house. There are 2 ways to communicate. One is through the chat, and if you're on our website and you're doing this,
Hi, Jeannie. Hi, Marcy. Hi, Michael. That's good. At least we're not going to be just talking to each other, honey.
Yeah, that. Okay, so if there are a couple ways to communicate, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay. So, hey, look. All right, so there's the chat, which is this thing right here, and then there's also the Q&A. All right. So if you scroll down a little farther, you have a question box down there that you can also communicate with us. And if you want to make your questions anonymous, I think there's a way to do that. So hello, everyone. And we're going to start off with just some basic facts about depression that Dr. Ann is going to cover, kind of an introduction to depression, and then we're going to start taking questions. Actually, let me do a poll question first.
Nice.
We'll do this quick poll question.
Hi, Adrian.
Whoops.
Is there supposed to be a poll on the screen? Oh, there it is. Way to go.
And it should show up on the website as well, I think in the chat or on the video. So how many of you in your lifetime have dealt with depression? And the answers are coming in. So we've got everyone that's here and has answered the question has been affected, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to close the poll and let Ann start talking.
So I figured it would be good to just define it. So depression is a mood disorder that presents with either a persistent feeling of sadness or loss of pleasure, or both. And it can also manifest as a loss of interest. And then major depressive disorder is a period of at least 2 weeks when a person experiences a depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure in daily activities. And the majority of specified symptoms, like problems with sleep and eating and energy and concentration, self worth. So, chronic illness has considerable morbidity and high rates of relapse and recurrence. That's the major depression is considered a chronic illness, and once someone has a depressive episode, there is a high chance of having more in the future. But unfortunately, most people don't seek help early because of stigma or lack of insight into the medical condition itself, or financial factors, or just thinking that this is something that they have to get through themselves. So the median time between onset of illness and someone seeking help is 5 years, which is heart wrenching. There's a bidirectional relationship between major depression and chronic disease. So at least half of people with major depression also have at least one chronic physical condition. And similarly, individuals with chronic physical conditions are at greater risk of major depression. And if you have a chronic physical condition and you have coexisting major depression, there's a poorer prognosis for that physical condition and increased rates of complications. So, an example of that is people with depression who have a heart attack are more likely to die from the heart attack than those non depressed patients with heart attacks. So, when getting diagnosed with major depressive disorder, there are other things that need to get ruled out. There's a whole list of criteria for diagnosing major depressive disorder, and it includes you have to have 5 of the following symptoms present nearly every day during the same 2-week period. And that's reported by the patient or observed by others. One is low mood. Second is anhedonia, which is a decreased interest or pleasure in almost all activities. Insomnia or hypersomnia. Fatigue or loss of energy. Significant unexplained weight loss or gain or change in appetite. So a significant weight loss or gain is 5% of body weight within a month. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. So the person is showing more agitation or is slower with their activity. Indecisiveness or poor concentration. Feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt. And the last is recurrent thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation without a plan, a suicide attempt, or a specific plan for suicide. So any of those 9 things, if the person has 5 of those things every day, nearly every day for a 2-week period, and at least one of them has to include low mood, and the symptoms that they're showing have to represent a change from previous function. And the symptoms can't be clearly attributable to another medical condition. Specifically, that there cannot be manic episodes, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So other things that need to get ruled out, one is something called persistent depressive disorder, which are milder depressive symptoms that last for at least 2 years in adults and at least 1 year in children or adolescents. And within that time frame, the patient should not be asymptomatic for more than 2 months. So that's a different type of depression. There's also adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So an adjustment disorder is an emotional response to a stressful event. such as marital or relationship problems, loss of employment, acute illness, and patients can present with low mood. But the diagnosis is made only if the full criteria for major depressive episodes are not met. The next one to rule out is bipolar disorder, and this is someone who has both depression and mania. And there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 is a milder version. So, bipolar disorder is often misdiagnosed as people with bipolar disorder are often misdiagnosed as having unipolar major depression because they often present with depressed mood. That's the initial presentation. And the reason for that is that hypomania is often associated with increased energy and increased creativity and very little impairment in function. And so a lot of patients may not see that as a negative. The difficulty is that bipolar disorder is treated very differently than depression, and antidepressants can actually make bipolar worse. So it's important that that gets differentiated at time of diagnosis. A good question to differentiate is, have you ever experienced a period of time when you felt happier or more energetic than usual for no particular reason? And if so, did you notice during those times that your thoughts were more rapid, or you had more ideas, required less sleep, or were more talkative than usual? Did others notice this too? What did they say? How long did it last? And did they have any impact or effect on your life, work, or relationships? So that's a way to tease out if there's a mania component to the depression. And then other things to rule out that can present like depression are neurological conditions like dementia, Parkinson's, MS. Those all have symptoms that overlap with those of major depression. And then others include infections. We all know thyroid dysfunction, um, malignancy. So there are, well, we can talk about this. There are tools that can be used to help decipher whether someone is suffering from depression. Another thing to look at is substance abuse. One of the quickest, easiest ways to cause depression is to drink alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant, so is a lot of pharmaceutical medications, um, so are some supplements. So making sure that there's a thorough review of what substances are being taken in. So that's the background of what depression is. I haven't checked for questions. Are you checking for questions, honey? Oh, my feed is. Are people having trouble with my feed? Am I still getting heard?
Uh, I don't know. I got a comment from someone that they were having some trouble, and then I put out a question to ask if anyone else was having trouble, but I haven't gotten an
Okay,
answer yet. So you sound great to me. I'm
thanks.
not. There's a little occasional, blip, but nothing
Okay.
major.
So, any questions about the definition of depression? Some other things
Frozen.
that I'm frozen?
You froze for a second.
Okay.
Um, so what were you going to talk about?
Well, I was going to see if anybody had questions about the definition of depression.
Hmm.
In terms of, and I don't see questions unless I'm not checking the right place. Q&A. No, we're good. So, in terms of prevalence, it's quite prevalent. Uh, I mean, we can get into all that. The prevalence in teenagers is rising rapidly. Obviously, COVID uh, there was a triple fold increase in anxiety and depression through the pandemic. Um, so it's a major issue. There's a figure in 2020 that said that 17% of teenagers in the United States, ages 12 to 17, had at least one major depressive episode. Um, that number is highest among females. So, female adolescents, it's 25%. Males is 9%. Another population that this is an issue is in the older adults. And where we can talk about causes and uh, cognitive decline also increases depression, and depression increases cognitive decline. There's a bidirectional relationship there as well. So in terms of causes, I mentioned substances, depressants, including alcohol, any sleep medications, benzodiazepines, any Klonopin, Prosom, Xanax. These are Ativan. These are all depressants. Barbiturates used to be given for anxiety, not so much anymore. Now it's mostly benzodiazepines, but those also are depressants. Narcotics of any kind, THC, marijuana can be a depressant. Uh, there are several drugs like finasteride, isotretinoin given for acne. There's a smoking cessation drug that can cause depression. Many of the antihypertensives, like beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, ACE inhibitors, um, ARBs, those can cause depression as a side effect. But alcohol is a big one. And as a side note, alcohol also causes Alzheimer's, so and increases breast cancer risk. We should do a whole thing on alcohol. um, you were holistic doctors, so a big contributor to depression is nutritional deficiencies, including the B vitamins, folate, B12, B6, the omega-3 fatty acids. If there's a deficiency there, that can cause depression. Vitamin D, you've heard both of us talk about vitamin D, but low vitamin D causes depression. Low iron, low zinc, iodine, selenium, low amino acids can cause depression. There's testing for that. The reason for that is that amino acids are the precursors to our neurotransmitters. So lots of causes. There's genetics also play a role. Any major life events can trigger a major depressive episode, even in someone who doesn't have a family history or genetic predisposition. Obviously, hormonal changes can trigger it. All the women on this call know that we can experience all kinds of moods related to our hormones. So, symptoms can get tricky. Everybody knows the usual symptoms of feeling sad, tearful, empty, hopeless. Those are the most common. But there can also be anger outbursts, irritability, frustration over very small things that can be a symptom of depression. As I mentioned, loss of interest even in um, really any normal activity that used to bring interest, like sports or hobbies or sex. Um, Sleep disturbances in either direction can be a symptom. Tiredness or lack of energy. So even small tasks feel like they take a big effort. Anxiety, agitation, restlessness, these can be actual symptoms of depression. Slowed thinking, slowed speaking, slow body movements, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, fixating on past failures or self blame, difficulty concentrating, difficulty making decisions, difficulty remembering things. So you can see it can get tricky differentiating between cognitive difficulties and depression. And then unexplained physical problems like back pain or headaches, or we see a lot of stomach aches in kids as a symptom. So, and the elderly too tend to get more non-specific musculoskeletal complaints as a presentation for depression. So those are the key symptoms. Any questions about presentation?
Nope.
Okay. Any questions
So,
about anything so far?
no questions.
Okay. Um, One other symptom that I'll mention in kids is poor attendance in school, poor performance in school. That's another symptom that some folks wouldn't think of. Refusing to go to school, um, clinginess, irritability, being extremely sensitive or feeling misunderstood. Sometimes self harm, like cutting, um, using drugs and alcohol can be a symptom of depression. It can also cause depression. And then, of course, avoidance of social interaction. That's another big one. That's a symptom in older adults as well, is often wanting to stay at home rather than socializing or doing new things.
I'm going to open a poll.
Okay.
What is the leading cause of disability in the U.S. for ages 15 to 44? Work-related injury, that's got to be it. Major depressive disorder, no way. Heart disease or chronic neuromuscular disorders. Let me open that. There we go. Now it's open. People can vote. And I just put this up because it's, just to emphasize what you were sharing about how prevalent it is and how devastating it can be. So far everybody is nailing it. The trick question didn't work. Dang it. And then this is something that you mentioned, another poll, which is what percentage of adolescent females will experience a major depressive disorder? 10%, 50%, 25%, or 5%?
Is this to test whether people are listening?
Yes.
Okay.
Although I don't think I can tell who answered which thing, so I can't pick on anybody. So far, the correct answer is 25% of adolescent females will experience a major depressive episode. It often seems like it's a lot higher. And, you mentioned that 9% of adolescent males will have an event, but one thing that I wanted to point out is that for men are much less likely to report. I had a slide about that, but
Yeah, you do.
We are much less likely to report symptoms, so we're much less likely to be diagnosed. And of course, I can imagine it when I was 17 years old, um, I mean, I'm 50 and it's hard for me to share my feelings. Um, so certainly when I was 16 or 17, I wasn't going to seek care for or share those feelings. So I think in adolescent males, it's probably a lot higher incidence than 9%. And the symptoms, like you mentioned, and are different for young men. They're primarily more on the irritability, isolation, uh, aggression. That unfortunately in our culture is kind of like, oh, he's a teenage guy. Just that's what they do. Um, Whereas, unfortunately, with young women, if there's behavior like that, it's more young men like me, still very young. We get a pass a lot of times based on stereotypes and stuff. So, anywho, back to you.
Let
So
me
I
ask some
saw.
questions.
Oh, cool. All right. I will show the question. What are the initial steps that you should take if you see symptoms that Dr. Ann laid out?
That's a good question.
Um, Great question. Thank you, Anonymous. Uh, well, first of all, you need to talk to someone that is a safe person, and that someone may be your doctor. That may be the first person that you're safe talking to. It may be a trusted friend or family member, but you really need to talk to someone as soon as possible and share these signs and symptoms that you're having. And it's natural to feel afraid when you're having these symptoms that you're going to be immediately labeled as being depressed. Unfortunately, again, with our culture, mental health issues are still in the 21st century frequently viewed as a weakness of character or toughness, a weakness of stamina, of strength, and so it would be understandable for you to feel like it's, well, I don't want to say anything because as soon as I say something, they're going to think I'm crazy. Uh, but you need to find a safe person. You can absolutely bring those feelings and concerns to me or Dr. Ann. Um, I have professionally, and Ann can say the same thing, treated thousands of people with depression. And most of our patients who say they have these symptoms are not suffering from depression. And that's why your holistic doctors will say, well, before we label this depression, let's
Right.
check your thyroid, let's check your iron and your B12 and your amino acids, and let's talk about your diet, because depression is supposed to be a diagnosis of exclusion. That's how it's supposed to be in medicine, meaning let's make sure it's not something else first. However, in conventional medicine, it has become the first diagnosis because they don't have these other tools that we have, that holistic practitioners have. So please feel comfortable bringing those concerns to, if there's no one in your social circles that you feel safe with, you can feel safe with us. Anything you want to add, Anne?
If there's any feeling of suicidality, that's a 911 call, or a 988 is the suicide crisis hotline. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have a lifeline chat, um, where Dave's available 24 hours a day. So, um, Absolutely, I would say bring it up to your doctor for sure. But if there's an urgent need, the 988 number is really crucial to know, and that can be used by a loved one as well. And everything is free, everything is confidential. So they have a special, if you're a US veteran or a service member, they have you can press 1 and they kick you to the veterans crisis line. So they have their own chat, lifeline chat as well. They also have Spanish speaking. It's really well done.
All right. So the next question we have is a question about type 1 diabetes. What is the percentage of any age with type 1 diabetes? And I think the intent of this question is comparing, and the answer to that is it is minuscule. If I do the math correctly, it's of all Americans, the percentage that have type 1 diabetes, it's a little over 1.5 million people uh, alive right now who have type 1 diabetes. So in a country of 400 million people, the percentage, that's a very, very, very small percentage, less than 1%. Uh,
But people with diabetes, 1 in 4 people with diabetes have depression.
yes, it is extremely. Now, is that type 1s or all people with diabetes? Because a lot of
That's
people with type 2 have depression.
So that's both types combined. Adolescents with type 1 diabetes have five
Oh yeah.
times the rate of depression than adolescents without type 1. So it type 1, I mean all chronic disease, but type 1 diabetes does significantly increase the risk of depression.
Yes, for sure.
It's a great question.
Um, let's talk a little bit about causes. So you already brought up, I'm going to open a poll. How does eating low quality / highly processed food increase our risk of developing depression? We develop nutritional deficiencies, or we develop intestinal microbiome bacterial imbalance, or chemical food additives alter our hormones and neurochemistry, uh, or all of the above.
Standing.
Well, it's all of the above. And this is a very important thing. So, a couple of big changes are happening in depression causation research. One of them is that old uh, the old standard explanation of depression as a serotonin disorder has been debunked. So there are different ways in scientific research to review other data. So sometimes you do original research and then sometimes you do reviews of other people's research. And there's a systemic review or a systematic review. And then there's something called a meta analysis, which is a very complicated review. I've never heard of a systematic umbrella review before, but I think it's probably pretty thorough. And the conclusion from this was that there is no evidence, and unfortunately, there really never has been, that any any deficiency of serotonin function or the amount of serotonin, the concentration, anything related to serotonin causes depression. Now, this theoretically should eliminate the SSRI class of medications as depression treatments, and it won't do that because the exact mechanism of action of SSRI medication is literally not clear. One of the things they do is inhibit serotonin reabsorption by the neuron. But so this is a big deal. We put people on 5-HTP, and we put people on tryptophan, and we put people on monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and we're trying to get serotonin up, and we're trying to do this neurochemistry magic, and it turns out it's much more complicated. And remember, as we talked about with anxiety, we are not creatures that are divided into systems. That's a man-made construct to help us make sense of how complex our bodies are. We are one system, and it's just exquisitely complicated. We are a psychoneuroimmunoendocrine system. All of those systems that in medicine we divide up: immune system, neurologic system, endocrine system, are one system. And so to nail down one chemical, one neurotransmitter, or even one amino acid or one hormone that's responsible for this huge process, it was a mistake from the beginning, but that's what humans do. And it's how we learn. So, and then the other major development in medical research is the impact on the microbiome. Not only with depression, but almost with every chronic illness now, there is a link back to the microbiome, the intestinal microbiome. There are several major microbiomes in our bodies. The intestinal microbiome is the largest and most complicated. But the food we eat, as you can see on this slide, affects our microbiome. And then as the microbiome then affects our central nervous system and our immune system, there's again a feedback loop to the gut microbiome to disrupt it and change it in response to. So not only are we feeding our gut microbes like actual physically damaging food that harms them, after we absorb all those chemicals and faulty nutrients and things, then eventually it comes back to bite us a second time. Remember that we are, this gets a little weird. We are, when we eat our food, one of the primary purposes of the food we eat is to feed these bacteria. So when we say you got to eat healthy, and you got to chew your food, slow down, the purpose of that is actually, the purpose of chewing your food is to feed the bacteria in your mouth. That's it. Now, there's other signals that happen because you're chewing and things that are important, but that's the only time the bacteria in your mouth get fed. That's why you have to put the right food in your mouth and keep it in there long enough so they can get fed. Same with your gut. The food choices we make are making or breaking our gut microbiomes, and that in turn affects our mental health. So just keep that in mind. But more on this, the research on this is because pharmaceutical companies see massive dollar signs if they can figure this out and patent different strains of bacteria, or isolate little little communication signals between the bacteria. There's big bucks. So, all right. So we have another question. Did you want to add anything, Anne?
No, it's
I
great.
kind of went off on a little rant there.
Yeah, it's great.
Excuse me. Okay. Can depression be affected by the season?
Excellent question.
Well, it's an excellent question. And do you want to talk about seasonal affective disorder, Anne? Or I can.
Uh, sure, either one. It's fine.
So, yes. So, major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders can all be affected by the season because the change of seasons is a fundamental change to our circadian rhythm. And so especially if you already have a circadian rhythm disturbance because you stay up too late or you don't get enough sleep for whatever reason, then when there's a seasonal change, absolutely your mood will be affected by that. Okay, so if you already have existing major depressive disorder, you don't qualify as seasonal affective disorder, but even that major depressive disorder can be worsened by less sunshine exposure. Um, but I want to say that again, watch Dr. Ann's Light and Dark talk and realize that we make our own little seasons. We have our own little universes inside of our houses, and we have our own little suns and moons and that are affecting our mood even more so, unfortunately, it seems, than the sun nowadays. So you have to take care of your internal environment regardless of what season it is. But there is, as you can see, and most people have heard of, a disorder called seasonal affective disorder, which is as the the length of light during the day shortens, millions of people suffer from depressed mood and other depressive symptoms. And it's a very real disorder that can be treated with lifestyle modification, including making sure to get morning sunshine. You can use uh, light therapy, and some, obviously, all of the other things we've mentioned with causation can be helpful if we get a chance to look into that, nutrients and diet and sleep and stress and everything else. Do you want to add anything, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, we've known about seasonal affective disorder for a while, and um, vitamin D became, people thought maybe it was the vitamin D, which is a huge thing. Our vitamin D levels do drop precipitously in the winter. We need UVB light in order to produce vitamin D in our bodies. Um, the latest thing now is something called photobiomodulation, where people are getting treated with um, red light therapy, um, infrared therapy, and or red light therapy. And so it's just a new discovery of what the sun gives us that is therapeutic and it helps feed the microbiome. It helps us produce nutrients that we need. It helps set our circadian rhythm. It helps balance our hormones. There's so many things about being outside that we have not yet discovered. So people are buying red light therapy devices. They're buying sun lamps. Uh, I think it's cheaper to go outside, maybe take a trip south if you can for a week in the wintertime. Um, but yes, seasonal affective disorder is a very real thing.
Great question. All right, this is another really great question. Is maladaptive daydreaming a type of depression? I'm going to have to say I don't know.
So, people with maladaptive daydreaming do exhibit symptoms of depression. I mean, they have difficulty functioning, they have difficulty focusing, they tend to have anxiety. Um, I don't know about the incidence of being diagnosed with both simultaneously. I'm not as familiar with it, but maladaptive dreamers dissociate from reality. They have such intense daydreams that they absorb themselves in the daydream and then can unknowingly act out the behavior or speak dialogue for the characters in their daydream.
Hmm.
So I don't think that really answered the question, but I would imagine just based on the symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming that there's a big overlap there.
Yeah, and I think again, I don't know anything about maladaptive daydreaming. I'm going to learn about it now that I hadn't even heard that term before. But I know that people with depression, when you scan their brains, and I meant to bring a slide in about that. When you do PET scans or functional MRI scans, their entire brains are functioning differently. And that if the brain is where daydreaming comes from, which that's what all signs point to, then if that entire organ is functioning differently, then maladaptive daydreaming is at least a symptom or a sign of depression. But I don't know if it's actually been classified as a specific type of depression. Great question. All right, another question. You want to say something else?
I was going to go back to the question about, if I'm experiencing some of the symptoms, what should I do? Um, Assuming that the experience is mild. I mean, obviously, we already talked about talking to your doctor and using the hotline, but if you if you're looking for kind of lifestyle things, uh, we haven't talked about exercise, but all forms of exercise help depression. Um, we talked a little bit about diet, and obviously eating healthy improves depression. And then there are self tests that you can do to kind of gauge, am I actually clinically depressed? There's a P, is it called the PHQ-2? Can't remember what it stands for. PHQ, Patient Health Questionnaire. So there's the PHQ-2, which is a two-question questionnaire, and if that shows a positive, then you can do the PHQ-9, which is a 9-question questionnaire. Um, and then there's the infamous one is the Beck Depression Inventory, and that's a 21-question thing that you can find online. There's a specific one for elderly patients called the Geriatric Depression Scale, and that's a 30-item depression questionnaire that's specifically designed for older adults. And one of the differences is that it omits a lot of the somatic complaints, because older adults also have somatic complaints that can be related to depression, but can also be related to getting older. So those are just a few things that you can look up online if you want to. If you're thinking vaguely, I might have some symptoms. So sorry, I wanted to make.
Cool.
One other thing. Sorry, I want to say one other thing. Because of the pandemic, mental health the mental health system has been completely overwhelmed. And I hear from everybody, including myself, that it has been extremely difficult to find therapists who are accepting patients. Um, there are now more and more online therapy services that are being offered, and they there was a rating that came out, and I can list several of the ones that rated very high. One is betterhelp.com. One is Talkspace. Um, one is online-therapy.com, and we can give you guys a link to these. There's one for teens that's called Teen Counseling. There's one for couples called Regain Counseling, and these are all considered the best online therapy services. Um, the reason BetterHelp got rated so high is because they have the largest pool of therapists, but I have to share my experience. I sought help through betterhelp.com during the pandemic and got paired with a therapist and met with her 3 times. And by the end, she was recommending that I just need to bake more pie and deliver pie to neighbors. And I realized, you know what, I don't think that this necessarily is going to be a good matchup. So
Hey,
luckily,
pie is good though.
pie is good. Uh, I didn't have time to be baking pies, and I didn't find baking particularly therapeutic. So I'm not sure where that came from, except that maybe she needed to be baking more pies. I don't
Maybe
know.
she
But
wanted you to do math. Pie, math. Get it?
yes, it's a good one. Um, but they're very good. If you're not comfortable with the one you're paired up with, obviously you can switch very easy. So the most affordable online is called Calmerry, Calmerry. So there are many out there, but I just wanted to give you a list of some that are available if you've looked for therapists and have hit a wall, which a lot of people have.
And it's a great point. If the first therapist is not a good fit, or the second therapist is not a good fit, or the third therapist is not a good fit,
Yeah.
just keep trying. Please don't try to think yourself out of depression or read a book out of yourself out of depression. You need help.
There are also, if you're a part of a church, I know a lot of churches offer free pastoral counseling as well. So that's another option.
Awesome. All right, let's do this question. If you have multiple illnesses, can depression uh, be a creeping illness? Does it creep up on you over a long period of time? Absolutely. Um, Chronic illness is can be depressing. Chronic illness is a marathon. People who have a chronic illness or multiple chronic illnesses understand this. It's a burden that is always there. You never get a break from it. You can never turn it off. Excuse me. It's um, more so, it seems, with chronic pain disorders. There are very high rates of depression for people with chronic pain disorders, but any chronic illness can be uh, what I call toxic to the spirit. So that's a more of a metaphysical, emotional term. But in addition, those illnesses, by their very nature, remember, you are not an immune system separated from your endocrine system, separated from your nervous system. You are a neuroimmunoendocrine system. So if you have an immune system disease, you are also going to have neurologic symptoms. That's how diabetes and neuropathy go hand in hand. But for some reason, we think of depression as not a neurologic issue like neuropathy. So, of course, any chronic illness that involves the immune system, endocrine system, or nervous system, and those things are everywhere, so every illness does, can initially or eventually include depression, if not a depressive disorder, certainly depressive symptoms. And there is a difference. And that's another reason you need to seek a psychotherapist or a licensed clinical social worker or a pastor or someone or a holistic doctor or a regular doctor, someone who can figure out, is this just depressive symptoms that may actually be appropriate for your circumstances, or is this a disorder? So long answer is yes. Back to you, Anne.
um, a couple of little micro habits that you can do that seem to uh, help stave off depression if you don't have depression. Uh, Number one is get enough sleep. Get good quality 8 hours ideally of sleep every night. Make that your number one priority in life. Um, Second would be regular exercise, even if it's a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute stretching routine. They've actually done studies on stretching, and just 5 minutes of stretching is mood lifting. Getting outside, as we've talked about, getting sunshine, getting into the forest bathing. There's research showing that that helps. Even, you know, 20-minute walks nowhere near a forest seems to make a big difference. But they've done studies where they've had people look at a picture of a forest, and that also seems to really help. What it does is it lowers cortisol, and high cortisol can cause depression, just like low cortisol can. Um, Identifying your major stressors and making sure that you are that you have support, that you're not alone, um, that you have people that you can lean on and trust. I have a small group of women that I meet with once a week, and they have helped keep me sane through the pandemic
By Zoom.
by Zoom. Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be in person. Just an emotional connection with people that you can trust. Um, what am I forgetting? Even, little things, figuring out things that can make you laugh, identifying what pulls laughter down from for you. That didn't make any sense. What brings you down? So for me, watching the news, scrolling through social media, being with people who are excessively draining. So identifying things like that, and some of that you can't avoid, but doing your best to minimize it, or space it out. But sleep, sleep, sleep. And then there's lots of things. We didn't get into treatment. We didn't get into, um, you know, there are lots of adaptogens and things that are really wonderful, and there are new things coming out all the time. Saffron and rubidium and all kinds of nutrients that people are talking about that work with depression. But um, there are little micro things you can do with your lifestyle that are also really great.
Yeah. And to that point, there was a poll about, of the following, which is the most effective treatment for depression: prescription medication, aerobic exercise, or both. And it was interesting. Let's put up a slide here. When they looked at, there haven't been that many studies about this, but um, when they looked at this in all cases, so if you look at these two graphs, you have the supervised aerobic exercise plus medication on the left, and then on the right, you have just medication only on both of these separate graphs. The blue uh, bar was at baseline. So the people who had those depression scores at baseline in the blue, and then after they went through the protocol. The graph on the left is a 10-day protocol. So with exercise, just for 10 days, there was a substantial improvement in mood, depressive symptoms. But if you look over on the one on the right, you can see that at 16 weeks, medication only, those people actually worsened. Their depressive symptoms worsened. So excuse me. So medication, this tells us two things. One, medication is not an easy way out. People often say, just give me a pill. Um, and exercise is an extremely effective treatment for depression, as it is for many, many other things. I want to say one more thing about screens. Um, and you probably don't know anything about screen time. You probably don't ever talk about that. Um, but screen time is uh, a massive source of depressive triggers. Um, and this is a little tongue in cheek. What effect does internet connected screen time have on depression incidence? Um, I'm going to show a slide that no teenager can argue with, and really no adult should be able to argue with. But this is in adolescence. And the two lines that are highlighted are depression rates. The bottom axis, the x axis, is hours of screen time. On the right, the y axis, or the vertical axis, is depression, percentage of depression. I can't see it anymore. And you can see it steadily increases. But if we can't take the screens away completely, okay, because then there would be anarchy and probably just bad things happening all over America. But can we just break it at 2 hours? Look at this break point at 2 hours. The lines that I didn't highlight are anxiety symptoms in adolescence. Um, so maybe if we can just try to get 2 hours of internet connected screen time, not school related, because schools are requiring more and more screen time, maybe that could be a compromise. I was surprised to see this data, and I was, because we have raised and are still raising children. Two of them are in college, and we've been through this. And I'm sure, actually, I saw a slide that said the number one health concern of all parents is not COVID, it's not healthy eating, it's not being bullied, it's not getting in a car accident. It is by far excessive screen time. That is, of all uh, races and ethnicities, that is the number one health concern that parents have about their children, by far. So, and it's real. We should be. This is a serious, serious situation. Um, so we are over an hour. We said this was going to be an hour. Are there any last questions? Jen, thank you for that question, or that comment. And I'm looking forward to when we can talk about Tanner again. Any final questions, comments, complaints? All right. Well, we will wrap this up. Let me get that poll out of the way. I think everyone got it right. Yay. We want to thank you guys for joining us. We hope this was helpful. Please email us any additional questions that you have, info@loudandholistic.com. Please send us suggestions or ideas about other topics that you want us to cover. We really are interested and committed to making more of these events, whether they're live or recorded ahead of time for you to watch anytime. There will be a recording of this up on the members only section very soon. And Uh, Again, thank you for being with us. Have a great rest of your night.
Good night.